So, good morning, everybody. We are in chapter Lamed Vav 36 in Sefer Yeshyahu. And I'm going to take this and the next few prakim a little differently than we have in the past, because this is a section of Sefer Yeshyahu that goes back to the old-fashioned kind of narratives. It takes a couple of prakim until we start having some prophecies again and difficult Hebrew again. This is a story we're going to be reading, and it's a story that's very, very familiar because it actually is found 3 times in Tanakh. The first time in Tanakh that it's found is in Sefer Melachim. The second time in Tanakh, let me be I'm going to be kind of different on this one. The first time it's found in Melachim, but that's actually the second time it's written. The second time it's found in Tanakh is in Sefer Yeshayahu, which is actually the first time it's written. And the third time it's found in Sefer Tanakh is in Divrei Hayamim in Chronicles. Now, the reason I'm giving you that strange order is when I open up a Tanakh, what I first have is Melachim before I have Yeshayahu. But historically, Sefer Yeshayahu, according to Chazal, was written by Chizkiyahu. Was written by Hezekiah, by the king we're talking about here. And when it comes to Sefer Melachim, it was written by Yirmiyahu, who's about 70 years later. And then Divrei Hayamim is already written at about 70 years after that, a little bit more in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So chronologically, the 3 stories should be, this is the first appearance, then Melachim, then Divrei Hayamim. That's step number 1. Step number 2 of all of this is the sheet that I handed out to everyone, and I also sent out last night, this sheet, the 2-sided sheet. This comes from a great sefer, which I've used many times in the past, called Makbilot Bamikra, which are parallels in the Torah, in the Tanakh, where we find similar stories appearing twice. And if you look at it, and I'm going to go just from, you look at this side, which has a full page, you'll notice that the right-hand column, and again, there's 2 pages there. So the right-hand column and the right-hand column, that's Sefer Melachim. Middle column is Yeshayahu, and the left-hand column is Divrei Hayamim Bet. The stories, especially on this side of the page and on the back side, the end of the paragraph, are almost identical. The differences when you have, and the way this book is organized, the differences that appear is if information is missing from one source, but in another, so they put a blank space there. Or if there are different words that are used, so they'll highlight the different words in red. But if I'm looking at the text in general, between what appears in Sefer Melachim, just from 30,000 feet, Sefer Melachim and Sefer Yeshayahu are almost identical. And Divrei Hayamim is pretty close. And this really goes to something of a question of why the differences and why the similarities. And so, according to Amos Chacham, and Amos Chacham is the one who wrote the commentary in this book, in the Dat Mikra, a tremendous Talmud Bible scholar, the first recipient of the first place award of the Bible contest in Israel, an amazing story that he has himself. He was basically kept at home for most of his life. Up until that moment of fame, he had to borrow a suit to appear at the first Chidon Tanakh. He didn't own a suit. Amos Chacham. But brilliant man. What he wants to suggest is that actually the reason why the 3 sources are so similar, because all 3 sources are copied from the same source. That there's a 4th source that we hear referenced is Melachim, where it's called about Divrei Hayamim L'Malchei Yehuda, that there was a chronicle of the kings of Yehuda. There was a chronicle of the kings of Israel also. And that chronicles were like the formal historical record. You have them, in fact, in other civilizations as well, the annals of the kings. And that annals of the kings was used as the original source for all 3 stories. Why the differences? Well, the differences really stem from the fact that each of the books has a different purpose. So if I look at Sefer Melachim is looking more at the question of the history of the kings. It's not a historical document per se, but it is one that focuses more on history and on the structure, the royal families that were there, the troubles, the tribulations, the things we can learn from there. Yeshayahu is a book of prophecy. And therefore, any history that's included in Yeshayahu is a history that's necessary to support the prophecies or to understand the prophecies. And we've been talking about the events that are going to appear in Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin, Lamed Chet already since Perek Vav of Sefer Yeshayahu. And so there, it's in that piece. And then Divrei Hayamim is a book that establishes legitimacy of the Davidic dynasty. And that legitimacy doesn't require as many details as you'll have in the other two books. Those are the purposes. And in fact, if you look for a moment, and I highlighted it in my text because I had the advantage of having it first. So if you just look on the page, which is full, okay. And so, for example, if you notice in the right-hand column, where we start with Melachim Bet Perek Yud Chet, the place which is blank in our story, in Yeshayahu, really talks about this massive tribute that was sent, basically a bribe that was sent from Chizkiyahu to Sancheriv to try to convince him not to attack the south. And this massive bribe came about when Sancheriv first came on a mission to conquer both Eretz Plashet, the Philistines area, let's call it Gaza. And also there was an issue where Gaza was depending on Egypt in those days, but the Egyptian government was being overturned by the Nubian government, and therefore Egypt didn't show up to help out Gaza. But Sancheriv and his massive army show up, and this is in the 8th century BCE, show up, and when they show up on the doors of Yerushalayim, and they're ready to attack, they pay him off, and the amount they pay him off, according to Sefer Melachim, they give him 9,000 kikar kesef. Now, 9,000 kikar kesef, just to get an idea, is about it's about, let's see, I'm sorry, they give him 300 kikar kesef, okay, which is about 9,000 kilogram of silver. Okay, it's a vast, massive payment. And the payment was so vast that he actually had to raid the Beit HaMikdash treasuries to be able to pay it off, and even took gold and silver that were used in the Beit HaMikdash for ornamentation to be able to pay off Sancheriv. According to the story, Sancheriv then goes away, and then we have again, and this is just a little bit we're going to have here from Yeshayahu, we'll get to it in a minute, and then there's this whole thing that happens here in Divrei Hayamim. And in Divrei Hayamim, we talk about what Sancheriv does to prepare for war. What Chizkiyahu does to prepare for war. And so among the things he does are some of the things that we know very well. He, for example, digs Hezekiah's tunnels in Yerushalayim. He takes all of the wells and all of the springs from outside the walls of Yerushalayim, covers them up, redirects them to provide water for Yerushalayim, and he creates this amazing feat of the 400 meter tunnel that's dug directly into rock, which we still have to this very day. Okay, and in fact, what was so amazing about it, and they found it archaeologically, that they came from two different directions, and in the middle they met. You know, in the United States, when they had the cross-continental railroad, they were so impressed that they met, but they were working with the railroad tracks above ground. And so if they were a little bit off, they could have seen it miles away. Here you're digging into rock. There's no way you can communicate. And they met right in the middle. And we know that they met in the middle because we found the archaeological evidence says, hey, we met here. Here's where the two sides came. So one of the things was he prepared by digging the water and making sure there'd be a water supply into Yerushalayim as well. The next thing he did, and this is all in the Divrei Yamim report, he rebuilt and reinforced the walls around Yerushalayim. And then the third thing he did was he reorganized the army. So he got ready for an attack, which would seem to be a second attack after the time that Sancheriv got the first bribe, the massive payout. He figured he was going to prepare himself. Now, there is a major machloket of, was he rebelling or was he just being safe and know what might be coming later on? There's most likely, and even according to historians, it was taken by Sancheiriv as an act of rebellion. So going back even a step further, the massive tax that was paid by Chizkiyahu to Sancheiriv, as reported in Sefer Melachim, you could look at it as one of two ways. One was, hey, this was going to be the first of many payments, which may have been what Sancheiriv looked at it as. But it could also have been, it could have been that Chizkiyahu thought all along, it's a one-time payment. I got to get him out and I got to get prepared. And that might have been the stall that was taking place in that. After you get past these two big chunks, then really the story flows almost the entire parak, almost identical until the end of the story. So if I take the three stories together, I have the additional information. That's step number one. Now, why these different things would be mentioned in the different books, there are all sorts of theories about it. But again, if I remember that Divrei Yamim is trying to establish the legitimacy of the Davidic dynasty. Ezra and Nehemiah's purpose, when they came back to Eretz Yisrael for the building of the second Beit HaMikdash, they wanted to make sure the people understood they were in the right. They had the right to do so. Well, I understand now. I want to show Chizkiyahu was a very wise king, how he's preparing for what's going to be a battle. That's number one. If I want to understand, part of the challenges that the people were facing at that time, well, emptying the treasuries of the king and all of the wealth of the Beit HaMikdash, that would fit into Sefer Melachim. If I want to understand the prophecies of Yeshyahu, we're back in Perek Vav. He already told Chizkiyahu's father, Achaz, that he's going to be, Ashur is going to be coming, Assyria is going to come. And they're going to empty everything out of this land, and they're going to destroy things, like we read back in Perek Vav. I don't need those pieces. I need the rest of this story. And if I want to understand also ultimately what's going to be the miraculous salvation of the people, which is again part of the prophecies of Yeshyahu, I still need part of the story. So the Yeshyahu story is really the story. It was written first, but its purpose was different than the other two stories. Combined, it all works. There is historically, and I did send this, I didn't print it up because it's so many pages. If you're interested, Ben Sasson's history. So I sent this this piece from Ben Sasson's history. It's in your email from last night. In Ben Sasson's history, he talks about also the records we have from Sancheiriv. We have Sancheiriv's annals, just like, not just like, we don't have the annals of the Malchei Yehuda. We don't have that original document that's referenced in Tanakh. That we don't have anymore. But we have found Sancheiriv's pieces, and we've also found, for instance, Sancheiriv's great victory at Lachish. Nowadays, you can go to the archaeological excavations at Lachish. You can see also the Assyrian conquest of Lachish. Okay, so you see all of these things. We have all of those pieces, and we see where there are some differences. One important thing while there are some differences, and it doesn't seem, according to the current historical record, it's not so simple to say that it was two different times, like the Tanakh presents it. It sounds more like from Sancheiriv's piece, it was one, and Sancheiriv presents his piece as great victory, and we present it as great failure, as a defeat, but that's not unusual. It all depends on who your audience is, okay? If Sancheiriv is going back home, and he's going to go back home, he's going to put the best face on something. So we can say, hey, you say whatever you want to say. It was a great victory. Okay, we're going to say it's a defeat. There is one piece with Sasson really can't deal with in any other way except to accept what Chazal say, and that is there is absolutely no explanation in the historical record why it is that all of the cities around Yerushalayim, there are more than 40 cities around Yerushalayim, were destroyed and captured by the Assyrians, but Yerushalayim was left whole. Now, according to us, we understand there was a miracle that occurred, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved Yerushalayim. According to the Assyrian record, it's this big question mark. Why did they leave Yerushalayim if they were right there? Okay. And there's no explanation, but we know the explanation. And again, that would seem to buttress what's happening and what's being reported on in the Navi himself. The last piece of introduction I'm going to do is just this chart, which is really, it comes to you from both. This was done by Rabbi Yitzchak Levi, who is one of the Ramim in Yeshivat Har Etzion. And it also comes to you from your local eye doctor, because if you can read the small print, okay, if you can read the small print, you're in good shape. It actually, by the way, is not that much smaller than the New York Times print. I think it's 1 point less. But what we're looking at, we're walking into right now year 14 of Chizkiyahu. So just to see what else happens, Chizkiyahu comes up. He starts a whole process, year 1 and 1 month, the opening of the doors of the house of God and its purification, rededication. Year 2, 2 months, offering of the Paschal sacrifice together with the kingdom of Israel, the restoration of the Torah and the prophecy of its former status. We see that Chizkiyahu, is on this major religious reform. He's one of those people who, according to Chazal, had the potential of being Mashiach himself, but that didn't happen. And then we see also in year 6, the problems that start. And the problems that start are the conquest of Shomron by Shalmaneser, the exile of the north, right? Then you have an alliance that's made with Egypt, which is important. We read about this. We learned about it back in Perek Lamed. Remember, Yeshyahu was mocking the fact that they were sending people down to Egypt to confer with Egypt. Then year 6, still, things are going bad, corruption, etc., till year 14. So Sancheriv comes, invades his campaign, conquers a tremendous amount, and then we start with all the rest of the things that are going to happen in these prakim. I'm reading from basically the 4th column from the left, the siege of Jerusalem, delegation of Rav Shakem to the outskirts of Yerushalayim. God smites the Assyrian camp. I'm sorry to give away the end of the story. 185,000 casualties, according to Shmot Rabbah. And then the Babylonian delegation sees all the treasures of the royal palace, which was Chizkiyahu's arrogance. His big mistake was that at the end of the story, he goes ahead and he shows off everything they have to Bavel, and Bavel is going to be the next empire to rise, and they're going to be the ones who are going to be attracted to all of this wealth. What Shmot Rabbah? It's found because when we're talking about the issue of Yerushalayim, it's part of the Yerushalayim piece, or part of the Mikdash piece. Okay, that's all background, and a lot more background than I normally give, but to understand and appreciate, and this is a great historical piece, and you know the story. So the story, by the way, is going to be, this parak is going to talk about the fact that Sancheriv is going to come. This would be, according to traditional Meforshim, this is his second appearance after the bribe that was given. He shows up outside Yerushalayim with a massive army. This army sounds like it's ready to attack Yerushalayim. It lays siege on Yerushalayim. And he sends some of his people to mock Chizkiyahu, to try to get the people to turn on these Chizkiyahu. And this is the initial conversation that takes place. Now, it's the 14th year of Chizkiyahu's reign. It's about halfway through his reign as a king. Sancheriv comes, and he goes ahead and he captures all of the fortified cities, Yerushalayim. In other words, and in Yehuda, nothing is a match for Sancheriv's army. Now, Sancheriv, again, is an interesting person. He's the son of Sargon II. We know Sargon, he'd been there before. Sargon died in 705 in battle. And according to the records of the Assyrians, they never retrieved his body. And there was a tremendous amount of upheaval. Once a king is killed, who's the succession? It took 4 years, 3 to 4 years, until his son, Sancheriv, is secure enough in his role as the king of the Assyrian Empire to come back. Okay, and he comes back after he puts down all of his things, all of his enemies, all of the other pretenders to the throne, and he's ready to attack. Now, why does he want Yehuda? The reason he wants Yehuda is he wants the clear path down to Egypt. It's not that he wanted to destroy Yerushalayim. He didn't have any great religious, motivations. This is just very practical. We're in the way, and we've been in the way since the beginning. Okay, so since we're in the way, we got to get him out of the way. We got to move a roadblock. The roadblock happens to be Israel. And he goes ahead and he comes down and he begins to destroy all of the cities around Yerushalayim. Vayishlach melech Ashur et Rav Shakeh milachish Yerushalayma el melech Chizkiyahu bechel kaved. And so he establishes his base in Lachish. Now, again, we know so much about Lachish, and in fact, Lachish, the excavations of Lachish, if you haven't been there, I encourage you to go there. It's it's really something amazing. It's about 20 kilometers south of Beit Guvrin. It's not far from Yerushalayim, and you learn a lot about Ashur, about the Assyrian Empire there in Lachish. And if you were to go back to Bavel, you would see these amazing. If you go to the Oriental Institute, you'll learn about Lachish and him, and also Sancheir, because we have a lot of those artifacts here in Chicago in the Oriental Institute. Now, the king of Ashur sends Rav Shakeh. Rav Shakeh is one of his major officers. What is Rav Shakeh? Rav Shakeh, very simply, Rav Shakeh in Akkadian, which was the language, means Sar Hamashkim. The Rav is the master, Shakeh, Lishtot, okay? It's the same thing. He sends the Sarah Mashkim. Now, the Sarah Mashkim, we know this even from Pharaoh's time, was a high official in the court. What was his job? Well, part of it was to protect the king. He was an advisor. He was the one guy the king trusted enough to be his food taster originally, to make sure that he's not being poisoned. Okay, and so therefore he sends Rav Shakeh there. When he sends Rav Shakeh, it's interesting that he sends him, and Rav Shakeh has a fascinating ability. We'll see in a minute. He speaks Hebrew. And the fact that he speaks Hebrew has led Chazal, and there's a number of places where you find it, in the Gemara in Sanhedrin is one of them as well, where Brachos also has it, where Rav Shakeh speaks Hebrew because he originally was Jewish. Okay, he's an apostate, and he has turned on the Jewish people, and he's able to speak. There is actually an opinion that Rav Shakeh is the son, is one of the two sons of Chizkiyahu and Yeshayahu's daughter. Okay, that he has a lot of yichus. And this goes back to a Gemara in Brachos, which talks about the fact that Chizkiyahu was condemned because he hadn't married and didn't have any children. And so as a result, Yeshayahu comes to him and says, you're wrong. And Chizkiyahu tells Yeshayahu, well, I saw that what's going to come from me is going to be evil. And Yeshayahu says, you don't have that choice. You don't make those decisions. And ultimately, he has two children, and one of the children is Rav Shakeh, according to the Medrash. Now, there's a problem based on the Medrash in Brachot that Rav Shakeh actually dies younger than this Rav Shakeh would be. But whatever it is, this Rav Shakeh, the fact that he knows Hebrew would seem to be pretty clear that he has some strong Jewish connections in it as well. And he sends him to Melech Chizkiyahu. Now he's sending to meet with the king himself, Bechel Kaved, obviously with a strong army. Okay, and where does he send them? Vaya amod betalat habrecha elyona, and they stand on the canal of the upper pool b'mesilat sedeh choves, in the pathway of the launderer's field. Now, launderer's field, by the way, if you look in, I don't know how they translated in Art Scroll. In the olden days, they used to translate it as the fuller's field. I had to look up what a fuller's field was until I understood what it was. Okay, laundry. Yeah, I didn't know fuller was laundry. Okay, it's this. So they send them there. Now, what's the significance of that place? Well, first of all, it must be a place, just logically, which is close enough that Rav Shakeh, without entering into the walls, that Rav Shakeh can communicate with the king or somebody else. So there must have been some kind of open area. But the real significance is that it was at that place, back in Sefer Yeshayahu Perek Zayin, Pasuk Gimel, that Yeshayahu, in the very same place, 30 years earlier, had warned Chizkiyahu's father that Assyria was going to attack. So it's a fulfillment of the prophecy, even in location of what's happening. So it's a practical piece, but it's also something that's very symbolic. Where that place is, there are all sorts of theories. One of the theories is, actually, we see it nowadays. If you've gone through the the tour in the City of David tours, you've gone through the tunnels, and nowadays when you come out and there are those pools. Now, one of those pools is very important for Christianity, is a pool, a Christian pool. But in that area, very likely was the area of where this meeting took place. It's the lower part of where the wall would have extended. It's easier access. It's one of the theories. Of course, the other theory says it's the exact opposite side. So we're not sure where. Yeah.
Considering that you had said that it was an act of rebellion to redirect the waters, he's standing in the he's in the channel where there should have been a pool,
Right.
and there wasn't.
Mhm.
And he's standing in where they would have done laundry, but they wouldn't anymore because there was no more water there. So he's like standing in the same place, which is symbolic of,
All
you diverted all the waters.
all
you are rebelling.
right, all of this really plays out really well. And you see all of those things coming together. You realize that the fact that the Navi identifies the place so precisely, well, first it tells us that people knew where this place was. This must have been some kind of open meeting area, but it also tells us there's significance to it. And so that's a piece of it. Now, if we keep on going, Vayetze elav Eliakim ben Chilkiyahu asher al habayit, v'shevna hasofer, and three people come out, V'yoach ben Asaf HaMaskir. Now, each of these people come out, and these people obviously have different roles, and we've seen these different roles in play in the past. Okay, so the first is the person who's responsible al habayit. Okay, he has a major role within the monarchy itself. If you're in charge of the bayit, you're in charge of the Beit HaMikdash, you're in charge of the king's assets in the same way. In Shevna, the sofer, the scribe. Now, a scribe is much more than just, a stenographer. Okay, very important role. And Yoach, the maskir, who had this other piece, it may have been a treasurer, other pieces of it as well. And we'll notice, and this is actually in Rav Levi's piece, he says that there is Shevna was switched. Originally, Shevna had a different piece with Eliakim, but that's fine. Vayomer alehem Rav Shakeh. So Rav Shakeh tells him. Now, in the account in Sefer Melachim, there are two other people who come with Rav Shakeh. There were three messengers that came with Rav Shakeh, and there are three people who come from Chizkiyahu. Why we don't mention the other two? Again, theories, but really Rav Shakeh is the one who's taking the lead on all of this. He's the significant player in it. And for this purpose, it's more than enough. Vayomer alehem Rav Shakeh imruna l'Chizkiyahu. Please tell, not please, but now. Na can also mean immediately. And that's what the Targum Yonatan ben Uziel says. Okay, he says, Cha'an, I want you to convey this now to Chizkiyahu. Notice he doesn't call him Hamelech Chizkiyahu. He just calls him, I want you to tell Chizkiyahu. He's calling him by the first name. And this is to be Mizalzel. The Dat Mikra says this clearly. I just want to mock him. I'm not giving him the honor. Ko Amar Hamelech Hagadol Melech Ashur. Okay, Chizkiyahu, you're a little nothing, but let me talk about what the real king did. Hamelech, the king, you're nothing. Hagadol, the great king. Melech Ashur, the king of Ashur. Ma bitachon asher batacht. Okay, why are you feeling so secure? What's the security that you feel? The Mitzudat David says, Asher ba'avura maratabi. Why are you rebelling against me? How do you feel so confident that you can rebel? According to the Radak says, why aren't you paying your taxes anymore? You did it once, and you stopped. That would be, why are you so confident about that? According to the Malbim looks at the Divrei Yamim account and he says, why are you preparing for war? Why do you think that you're going to have a chance to get anywhere with anything? Marti, ach devar sfatayim. I said to myself, maybe just big talk. Okay. Now, maybe there's two different ways of looking at it. But this devar sfatayim. Rav Schwab has an interesting theory on this. The Rav Shakeh is saying, Amarti, I said to myself, these were just rumors. It wasn't real. What I heard were just people talking about what you're doing. Now I see that the reality is there. You've diverted the water. You've reinforced the walls. I hear you've put in grain. You're preparing for everything. I see it's real. So I thought originally it was just Devar Svatayim. Okay. One other possible, the Radak's father suggests that Amarta Ach Devar Svatayim, you're just praying. Okay, that this is Amarti Ach Devar Svatayim, you're just being hopeful. This is silliness what you're doing. He's mocking him in that way. The Radak, in the name of the Ibn Ezra, says that Ach Devar Svatayim, it's just meaningless talk. What you've got all the people together. Remember, the third thing he did was he reorganized the army and he gave him a real speech. Okay, an amazing speech he gave him. Okay, and that speech to encourage him, Rav Shakeh says it's just words. It's meaningless what you did. You're just giving him advice. You're talking heroics for war. Who are you really relying on? That you're rebelling against me. Who are you relying on? Okay, you're relying on Egypt. Now remember, Egypt is also going through an upheaval at this time. There are two different dynasties. Right now is the time of the Nubian dynasty taking over it from the Egyptians. And when they take over, originally, the Nubians really don't care about Ashur. As far as they're concerned, Ashur is a faraway issue. They don't want to get involved in anything. And that's why, when they first took over, why they backed out, or why they didn't follow through on an agreement that the previous dynasty had with Eretz Plashet, with the Plishtim there, and that whole area there, because Egypt kind of just fell off. Now Egypt's feeling a little bit more confident, okay, and this new dynasty is up and running for a while. But the reality of it is, Ashur says, how are you relying on them? Now, what are they? They are just a reed. Okay, you're relying to rest on the reed, which is broken. What is a broken reed? So first of all, again, imagery, Mitzrayim is a land of the Nile. Okay, so when you want to compare Mitzrayim to something, you talk about reeds. But this reed is broken. It's not strong. Asher yisamech ishalav, if a person, puts his weight on this reed, all it's going to do is pierce his hand. This reed is not going to help you. It's going to hurt you. That's exactly what Paro is going to do to you. You think he's going to be helpful. The reality is not. And we saw this in Perek Lamed when there were people who went down to Mitzrayim to try to create alliances with Mitzrayim, and Mitzrayim just ignored them. They didn't move. They didn't do anything. They spoke nicely. They had nice receptions, all those things, but they didn't have anything. He says, "V'chi tomar elai." And if you want to say, okay, so number one is, what are your plans? You've no plan. There's nothing to be. You shouldn't feel safe. You shouldn't feel secure. It doesn't work. And Mitzrayim aren't going to help you. Number two, v'chi tomar elai. And if you're going to tell me, El Hashem Elokeinu batach. Okay, Rav Shakeh says, listen, you have no hope with Mitzrayim, but you're trusting in God. Okay. Hello, who Asher Yisi Chizkiyahu et Bamotav et Mizbechotav? Wasn't Chizkiyahu the person who had removed all of the altars from around Yehudah? Now, one of the first things that Yeshyahu did when he first became king is he got rid of the private altars. They were all against halacha. It was all prohibited. None of the other kings had done it. In fact, in Sefer Melachim, very often you find at the end of a story of a king, a good king, Rak Bamot, Bamot Loisir. He didn't remove the Bamot. Why didn't they remove Bamot? Well, they didn't remove Bamot because while they were wrong, they weren't that bad. And they weren't that bad. If you think about it, they weren't worshiping Avodah Zarah. Okay, they were worshiping the wrong way. They were doing something wrong. But to remove them, in the eyes of the masses, it's like getting rid of everybody's shtibel and say you got to daven in a big shul. Okay, it doesn't work. People are going to rebel against you. So the other kings didn't do it. Chizkiyahu did it. Chizkiyahu was going for what's right. In the eyes of Rav Shakeh, remember, especially if Rav Shakeh is a Jew who's a mummer, he knows a lot. In the eyes of Rav Shakeh, he's an apostate. What Chizkiyahu did was apostasy. What Chizkiyahu did by removing those private altars was horrific. And it was rebellious against God. So he's telling the people, think about this Chizkiyahu. Yeah, he says, trust in God. Think about what Chizkiyahu did. He limited your access to God. God isn't happy with him either. What he said, the only place you can do is here in the Beit HaMikdash. You can't do it elsewise. He's talking to the common folk in Yerushalayim. And also remember, it starts out, okay, he says, go ahead and relay this to Chizkiyahu. And now in this pasuk, he's talking about Chizkiyahu, because he's really not talking to Chizkiyahu Rav Shakeh. He's talking to the people, the masses in Yerushalayim, who weren't necessarily happy with Chizkiyahu either. They wanted to seek other alliances. They had gone to Mitzrayim. They had tried all these things, and they're not happy with him even religiously. They think he's some kind of fanatic. And now, Hit arevna et Adoni Hamelech Ashur. Now, I want you to come with me. Rashi says, Ba be'eravon. Like, I want you to take a wager with me. Alpayim susim. I'll give you 2,000 horses. If you can just find 2,000 riders. In other words, he's mocking them. He said, you're feeling so safe. Let's go over this. Number one, the foreign alliances are useless. Number two, you think God's on your side. I'm telling you, God's not on your side. Number three, you're so confident with your military. You got nothing. I'll even give you the tanks. Do you have anybody who can drive them? Ve'ech tashiv et pnei pachat achad avdei adoni aktanim. How will you even go ahead and conquer just a small governorship when you're going v'tiftach lechal Mitzrayim l'rechev l'farashim, and then trust on Mitzrayim to bring you all of these things? So he says you don't even have the ability to do a little thing. Rashi says that each one of these people were responsible for 2,000 people, and ultimately, we're saying Chizkiyahu didn't even have 2,000 people in his army who could mount the horses. Ve'ata, now we're getting into the fourth piece. Hashem aliti ala aretz. Do you think I was able to come here if it wasn't that God was on my side? Now, what does it mean God was on my side? Well, back in Sefer Yeshyahu himself said in Perek Zayin, Pasuk Yud Zayin, Yavi Hashem Alecha. God is going to bring Ashur against you. So Rav Shakeh says, by the way, you want to talk about who's got God on his side? Melech Ashur has God on his side. Again, it buttresses the argument that he was a mummer, that he knew something. He really understood. He's saying, so you don't, not only is God not on your side, God's on my side. God told us we should do this. So what are you doing? Vayomer Eliakim v'Shevna v'Yoach el Rav Shakeh. Now comes an amazing thing. The three people who are standing there in this negotiation, who are being berated by Rav Shakeh, those three turn to him and say, Daberna alavadecha aramit. Would you please speak to us in Aramaic? Don't speak to us. Ki shomim anachnu. We hear it. V'al tedaber elenu Yehudi. Don't speak to us in Hebrew, ba'oznei ha'am asher al hachuma, which the people who are standing watching this can understand. Now, okay, the interesting thing is Rashi, first of all, takes an approach. And Rashi says that they're going to him and saying, would you speak to us in Aramaic? Why? Aramaic is the royal language. And the three people from Chizkiyahu's court say, give us a little cover. We're part of a royal people. We speak to us in the royal language. It used to be like the lingua franca was French. You know, when you went to courts, in 200 years ago, if you went to one of the courts of a king, they spoke French. That was the language. Okay. Nowadays, they don't even speak English anymore. Okay, but whatever it was, they spoke. There was a royal regal language. So they're just turning to him and say, why you're mocking Chizkiyahu, and by speaking in Hebrew, you're mocking us as well. Turn to Aramaic. But the end of the pasuk, right? So to take that approach, take the first approach, which I'm presenting, would have to mean is, don't speak to us like common folk. Speak to us like you should of people in our position. Okay. However, many other Meforshim take the opposite approach, and Rav Hirsch, via his son, takes the approach and look, let's be realistic. The people under siege in Yerushalayim were not unanimously behind Chizkiyahu. And what Rav Shakeh was doing is he was trying to appeal directly to them and bypass Chizkiyahu. And even in his conversation, sometimes we see he's not talking to Chizkiyahu, he's talking about Chizkiyahu. And so what they're trying to do is turn them and say, speak in Aramaic so they don't understand. The problem with that approach is, why in heaven's name would Rav Shakeh ever agree to that request? In other words, you're telling the guy who's doing this consciously and somewhat successfully, oh, you know what, would you tie two hands behind your back and try it all over again, because we don't want your plan to work. So please speak in Aramaic.
The damage was done.
Well, the damage has been done. Yeah, but but listen, again, because we're reading it in a linear fashion and we're reading it slowly, who knows how long this took and how quickly things happen. And did they maybe pop it in the middle? We don't know. Okay. But to imagine for a moment that Rav Shakeh would agree to the request to speak in Aramaic so the people shouldn't understand also is a bit far-fetched. They could
have approached him saying, talk to us because we're real. Really,
right.
The real reason
we're doing it was maybe, but the argument, in other words, that's why the argument of the royal language, where Rashi says, seems to be easier to accept, but both are out there. Vayomer Rav Shakeh, Hayal Adonecha ve'elecha shelachani Adoni. I have been sent by to you and to your master. I've been sent. Okay. Now, interesting. He says, "L'daberet hadvarim ha'ele halo al anashim al choma le'echol et chorehem." So atam v'lishtot et mei raglehem. He says very simply, you think I'm sent to talk to you and to your master? I wasn't sent to you and your master. I was sent to talk to them. In other words, he's being explicit. Yeah.
But that's the exact opposite of where he says,
right.
So
he's flipping it. In other words, when they go ahead, so going back to what Shoshi said, they may say, hey, it's insulting that you're talking to us in Hebrew. Talk to us in the royal tongue. And he says, I'm talking to you in Hebrew because I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to everybody else. Now, here we do have a fascinating thing just in terms of Tanakh. And you notice the Kriyuch Tiv. Okay, the Kriyuch Tiv here are not the classic kind of Kriyuch Tiv. Okay, the Kriyuch Tiv here is to preserve the sanctity of the Torah. This is among what's called Tikkunei Sofrim. Okay, there's Iturei Sofrim, Tikkunei Sofrim. We've dealt with it in other Sifrei Tanakh. I didn't want to take the time today on it because we're doing so much history. But very simply, we even find this in the Chumash, that there are certain words that were considered foul language. And while the Torah or the Tanakh preserve those words for accuracy purposes, when the common folk would hear them, when you would hear these stories being read, they'd be so shocked by those words, they would turn off. This is foul language. I don't want to hear it anymore. So preserve the sanctity of the sacred writings. What Chazal did is they created a Kriyuch Tiv. It's written with the foul language, but we don't use that foul language. Okay, it's not even, nowadays they'll do asterisks and things. It's not even that. We change the word. And so we use more genteel words. Okay. Instead of saying whatever they were going to say, they say excrement. Okay. And instead of saying what they were going to say, they say water. Okay, just to try to keep it nice. We once upon a time in the United States had those kinds of sensitivities as well. Okay, okay. Once upon a time, women were with child for 9 months, so you didn't use other words. Those kinds of sensitivities. Nowadays, those sensitivities don't exist, and what you hear and what you read is some of the reasons that people are shutting off to culture and society as well. But the Tanakh was sensitive to it. And so he says, listen, who am I going to? I'm going to the people who are suffering. Those are the people I'm speaking to, the people who are under siege and are starving. I'm talking to them. Vaya amod Rav Shakeh, and then he gets up. Vayikra b'kol gadol Yehudit, and he yells out in Hebrew. Vayomer, shimu et divrei hamelech hagadol melech Ashur. Again, hamelech hagadol. If I say, listen to the great king, what does it say about your king? The Malbim says, he's a great king, yours is a melech katan. Okay, that's why he's saying melech hagadol. Ko amar hamelech. This is what the king said. Al yasilachem Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu should not be carrying you. In other words, he shouldn't be tricking you. Kilo yuchal lahatzil etchem. He won't be able to save you. Va'al yaftach etchem Chizkiyahu el Hashem lemor. And don't let Chizkiyahu tell you that you should be trusting in God. Don't have him make you trust in God. Hatzel yatzilenu Hashem. That saying God is going to save us. That the city won't be given over to the king of Ashur. Al tishma'u el Chizkiyahu. Don't listen to Chizkiyahu. Again, not Melech Chizkiyahu, not him, Chizkiyahu, the guy. Now notice right here, the pasuk continues, but there's this massive pause. There's a new paragraph that's inserted here. Okay. Now, what's interesting is when the Torah puts in a pause, there's a reason for it. Okay, the reason is most likely simple explanation. Rav Shakeh let it sink in for a minute. He didn't finish his thought, but he let it sink in. Kicho amar hamelech Ashur. This is what the king of Ashur said. Asuiti bracha. Make with me a bracha. The Mitzudat David says bracha is a mincha. Give me a gift. In other words, I'm waiting for my bribe. Rashi says a bracha is shelat shalom, peace with me. Utzau elai, and come out to me. V'ichlu ish gafno v'ish te'enato ushtu ish mevoro. And if you do, you'll be able to eat from your vineyards. You'll be able to eat from your figs, and you'll drink the fresh spring waters. Notice what he had said before. They were eating and drinking. Okay, you're suffering in siege. Make the peace or give me the bribe, and it'll be good. Ad bo'i, until I come, v'lakachti etchem el eretz ka'artzachem, and then I will take you to a place just like your country. Now, Sancheiriv Bao Bilbelet Al Motze Chazal, that Sancheiriv, one of his policy was to mix up peoples. We had seen it with the northern kingdom. Remember, he brought in the Gerei Arayot. He took the people of the north and he sent them away. And this was a strategy. He wasn't into killing people. He was into controlling people. You take people out of their comfort zone, and they first have to figure out a way to live and to be comfortable again before they can even think of rebelling. And so he says, listen, I'm going to move you, but I'm going to move you to a place that's really nice. I'm going to get you a place that's just like your land. Rashi says that this was his place, okay? And in what it's going to be like, Eretz, Dagan, V'tirosh, Eretz Lechem, Uchramim, it's a land of grain, a land of bread, a land of vineyards. Don't let Chizkiyahu fool you, saying, Hashem yatzilenu, that God will save us. This is the second time he said the same thing. Don't Hatzilu Elohei Hagoyimi shetartzo miyad melech Ashur. Did any other nation saved by their gods from the king of Ashur? Ayeh Elohei Chamat va'Arpad. We're the people of Chamat, the god of Chamat and Arpad. Ayeh Elohei Sepharvaim? Where are the people? Where's the God of Sepharvaim? V'chi yetzilu et Shomron miyadi. And by the way, those are other gods. Did your God save the people of the north? 20 years ago, I exiled the people of the north. So your God is no better off than the other gods. Everyone's going to be done. So you don't have too much. You don't have too many choices in front of you. Mi bechol Elohei haratzot ha'elu asher hitzilu et artzam miyadi. Is there any God who has saved the people from my hands? Ki yatzil Hashem et Yerushalayim miyadi. Will your God save Yerushalayim miyadi? Now the Yud Kei Vav Kei is also significant. Okay, he's using God's proper name here. Now, there's a couple of different possibilities. One is, okay, that it's also a way of mocking God. He's been calling Chizkiyahu, Chizkiyahu, and now, by the way, I'm going to call your God by his first name also, the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Another one is just, this is the way God was known, even to the non-Jews, okay, the Yud Kei Vav Kei. And notice it's Yerushalayim. This is just Yerushalayim. Right now, it's just down to Yerushalayim. What? He could have said Elokeichem. He could have said your God. Okay. Could have said the God of Chizkiyahu, the God of the Hebrews, all of them.
So when it says K Vav K, without exactly saying it, but how's that pronounced?
We don't know. And in fact, the vowels, I've mentioned this before, the vowels typically for Yud Kei Vav Kei are borrowed from one of the other pronunciation, one of the other names. So typically they're borrowed from the Aleph Daled Nun Yud. So if you look at the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Aleph Daled Nun Yud, right? Then Do, and then you have Nai, right? So under an Aleph, instead of a Shva, you'd have a Chet of Patach. That's why you have the name So if you look under the first Yud, there's just the Shva. Okay. Then the next thing you have is Do. You have the Cholam. So over the Hey is a Cholam. Okay. And then you have Noi, okay, which is a Nun Yud with a Komatz, and you have a Komatz. Okay. So that's where these vowels come from. When it's Hashem Elokim, you'll have the vowels. When it's pronounced Hashem Elokim, you'll have the vowels of Elokim. This is also where the misunderstanding comes. And I know it might be a little controversial, but it makes no sense. Let me rephrase. It might be a little controversial. I always get myself in trouble when I say maybe a little controversial. Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah is using the vowels that are found here. Remember, in Greek, there's no yud sound. So just like Yaakov becomes Jacob, okay? So Ye becomes J, okay? And they use the vowels. So there are, so as a result, by taking the wrong vowels, mispronouncing a yud, you end up with that terminology, and that's where that name is the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Okay, we don't know how the Yud Kei Vav Kei was pronounced. And that's why, by the way, just one last piece, in the Koran Tanakh, that's why in Koran, you never, in their editions, you never see the Yud Kei Vav Kei with vowels. Because the vowels that were inserted in it were vowels like a Kriyuch Tiv vowel. It's just telling you how to pronounce it. And Koran wanted to just preserve the word itself, the name itself. So just to finish, we're going to finish. Ve'acharishu v'lo anu oto davar. So the three messengers, the three representatives from Chizkiyahu did not say anything. Ki mitzvat hamelech lemor lo ta'anuhu, because the king had told them, don't respond to him. Ve'yavo el Yakim ben Chizkiyahu asher al habayit ve'shevna asofer ve'yoach ben Asaf hamaskir, and the three of them came el Chizkiyahu kru'ei begadim. And they came and they had torn garments. Ve'agidu lo et divrei Rav Shakeh. And they reported what Rav Shakeh had said. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, where do these torn garments come? And they tore the garments. They tore them themselves when they heard Rav Shakeh, the apostate, mocking God. When a person hears heresy, the traditional Jewish response is to tear Kriya. And so they had torn Kriya when they heard what Rav Shakeh was saying about God. And that's how they appear before the king. Now, appearing before the king in torn garments is against protocol. Okay. Huh? Right. Okay. It's against protocol. Remember, the king there was protocol, and this is halacha. But they did it also for shock value as well. And we'll see the rest of the story in 2 weeks. Next week, again, Rav Schachter is going to be giving shir. I encourage everyone to come. We don't have that many opportunities to hear him. He's only, I think, speaking in next week about 8 times. So, I encourage everyone. And until then, I will see everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Oh, thank you.